The days are dwindling down, just about a month away from the Final Four postseason, right around the corner. Welcome in to one of our final regular season episodes of Six Rotations alongside the Hall of Famer Mick Haley. I'm Daniel Gilman. So happy that you're with us. Hope you enjoyed our little flannel episode last week. We got some good chimes about that, and we got to jump this one off before we get to the polls. This is going to be an episode that talks about the Power Five conferences and where everyone sits in the standings. Next weekend, we're going to talk about everyone else, all the mid-majors, all the low majors that are headed to the NCAA tournament. We've got conference tournaments this upcoming weekend and a lot of things to still silver through in some of the mid-major and low majors. But in this Power Five heavy episode, Mick, we've got to talk about the leading story of the weekend, and that's Dave Shondell and his block-heavy Boilers. They did it, something that I didn't think they would ever do. I worked, 3 seasons at Purdue. That trek is so tumultuous to play at Wisconsin, and the next day, or you get a day off, and then you play at Minnesota. And for the first time since the late 90s, they win in Minnesota, first in Shondell era, the Shondell Jewel era, and they also beat Wisconsin just like that. The Big West the Big Ten blown wide open.
And it was a beating. I mean, they took it to both teams, and You knew who was in charge through both of those matches. I was quite impressed with Purdue.
They snapped Wisconsin's 30-match home winning streak. And as you mentioned, it honestly, if you were watching, it should have been a sweep. Some bad service errors in one set for Purdue gave Wisconsin that one set. And then a crazy fourth set in Minneapolis on Sunday, Mick. It was 23-20, but there was a big challenge that changed it to 22-21. And then the freshman, the little sister of Mo Hornung, who we've all kind of, learned to really appreciate as one of the top DSs that isn't a libero in the nation. Her little sister, Allie, comes in, puts on a scoring service run that saw the 5'10" setter Haley Bush block Ari Miyabe, and then Caitlin Newton finished it out. And wow, I'm happy for him. I've got a different connection to the team than, of course, you do. But just watching that, it almost feels like for the time being, every week there's a new king of the Big Ten. And after Nebraska a few weeks ago, Wisconsin retook that throne. Now it's like, okay, we'll talk about the standings in just one moment here for the Big Ten. But wow, Purdue kind of controls their destiny.
And Newton for Purdue attacked with velocity. I don't think I've ever seen two nights in a row where she had velocity like this. And she literally was bouncing balls. She was very, very good. And if you caught the Wisconsin match, how quiet it was in the fourth set. I mean, it was quiet.
They knew, right? Yeah. Badger fans, some of the smartest fans, of course, a lot of that Midwest area, just geniuses in volleyball. They'll usually cheer for good volleyball on either side, but not when the Badgers are stinking it up. And I had a couple Badger fans that I know texting me throughout saying this match is over. It's one of those that it wasn't really in question throughout. And with Wisconsin losing, let's pull up our top 25. It's definitely controversial, right, to have Wisconsin ahead of Purdue when you see Purdue wins the season series, sits one game behind them in the conference. And I think the big one is BYU at 4. They just lost their first set in conference play. Is this the time to reward BYU? I don't know, but Louisville, Texas, Pittsburgh stay 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I think it's finally time to recognize BYU statistics. Why they're not playing the competition that you like to see them play. If you look at their percentage, their hitting percentage for and the opponent's hitting percentage against, they're by far, the BYU and Western Kentucky by far had the greatest deviation in percentage. And it's almost 90%. The team with the highest deviation finishes in the top group. So this is something that no one's taken into consideration. I really feel the NC2A committee needs to look at that. And the other statistical thing they need to look at is kills per set. And BYU's up in the 18s. Kentucky was 19.1 last year. And they're 17.8 this year. So
listen, I get it. They're doing phenomenal things, right? So is Cincinnati on the football side of things, but they're doing it against subpar competition. So it's just harder for me to wrap my mind around potentially giving BYU a national seed when their pre-conference slate started with Southern Utah, Long Island, UNLV, Weber State, Dixie State, and then the one team out of the Big Ten that they played was Michigan State. And the only team in the top 10 that BYU has played right now is a loss in 4 sets at Pittsburgh. So where do you see, and this is a conversation for our tournament episode coming up in a few weeks, but I think the committee got it right by not putting BYU in the top 4 2 weeks ago when we saw it, but whatever, it's the coaches. We have to, tip our cap, but the coaches they're on something else this week, Mick, because looking at the bottom of this top 25 and to have Illinois move up from 25 to 24, despite losing in 3 sets to Ohio State, they swept a bad Indiana team, but those teams on the outside looking in, Pepperdine jumped in deservingly with a great reverse sweep against San Diego. USD stays 23. And Mick, I know it's hard to vouch for any team on that bottom line to get dropped out, but Mississippi State has 2 conference losses. They come from behind to beat a good Tennessee team, in the 5th set, they were up 2-0. Tennessee forced 5. And Miami is doing everything that they can to get into this top 25, and the coaches are not respecting the Bulldogs or the Hurricanes.
Well, the Bulldogs won 3-2 twice against that team.
Against the top 25 Tennessee team.
Yeah, and they sent them right out of the poll. And Tennessee is physical. So Mississippi State has to be looked at.
You know what? It's one of those things where, like, yes, Washington State at 22, you see a big conglomerate of those Pac-12 teams. And if they're going to keep beating each other, it's hard to really drop one of them, but that might be the team, maybe San Diego, maybe Washington State. If you're asking Daniel, you're going to ask for one of them to jump in. Who drops out? I'd probably drop Illinois out. You have to beat a team like Ohio State in order to stay ranked. And if you lose in 3 sets, do you deserve to move up in the rankings? I don't know.
That's something we haven't talked about, the 3-0 losses. I worry about teams that have 3-0 losses. If you look at the matches last week, there were a bunch of good matches. They were all 3-1, 3-2. There were only 2. Oregon's win over UCLA 3-0. That's disturbing if I'm a UCLA fan. I don't go to Oregon and lose 3-0. I mean, I have my best player step up and at least lead the charge to get us 1 set and get us in a chance to win the 4th set,
Yeah, before we jump into the Pac-12, let's talk SEC. We're going to go standings in, some sort of formulated order here to go through our Power 5. And with the SEC standings, you see it here. It's Kentucky's road, but Mississippi State is not blinking. They only got to play the Wildcats once. They sit in 2nd at 13-2, those huge wins over Tennessee. And Kentucky has 2 matches against 10-2 Florida, sitting there at 3rd. The Gators are playing their best volleyball here in the back end of the year. They dismantled Arkansas. Mississippi State has now won 10 matches in a row. And Mick, this might be the most astonishing stat line of the weekend. The Bulldogs had 10 aces and 0 service errors in that 5-set win over Tennessee.
Oh, wow. That's pretty exciting. I was not aware of that. I also think you should keep your eye on Arkansas. They're sitting back there at 8-5. Behind Tennessee, even though Tennessee lost 2 matches to Mississippi State. They've got 2 little outside hitters that really beat the cover off the ball. You want to keep your eye on those guys sneaking in there 2nd or 3rd in the conference.
And it's going to be Arkansas at home against Mississippi State for a pair this weekend, Saturday and Sunday. And then Mississippi State finishes it against Auburn in Starkville, which, there's no assuming here at the back end of the year, but that's, you have to guess that if Mississippi State goes 3-0 there, there's definitely a chance that Kentucky could get beaten by Florida, and that one could be up for grabs. Let's go down and talk about the ACC. We didn't mention any ACC results this weekend. Miami dropped a set against Clemson, but took care of business, and there wasn't much movement up top. They all played only 1 match this weekend. It was a weird one for the ACC. Louisville has a 2-game lead over Pittsburgh, but Mick, your favorite match of the weekend resides in the ACC, doesn't it? It's a little bit of an upset watch.
Well, I watched also Louisville beat Georgia Tech in 3, and every one of those sets was contested at a high level. So next week we've got another big ACC match, and you'll have to help me because I can't find it.
That's okay. No, it's a fun one. We've got Louisville against Georgia Tech this weekend, or excuse me,
Pitt against Georgia Tech, right?
Yeah, there we go. Louisville plays Notre Dame.
Yes,
twice.
Yes.
I think Louisville plays. This is a weird one, right? Because I don't really know how to approach this. We record on Mondays and it airs on Tuesday mornings. Louisville could be defeated right? They could have that one loss by the time you guys are watching this on Tuesday morning. Notre Dame is going to host Louisville Monday night, the 15th. So last night, if you're watching this on Tuesday, and then they'll play again in 11 days. But yeah, it's Louisville it's Georgia Tech against Pittsburgh this weekend, Friday night in Atlanta. Yeah, I don't know. Is it an upset, right? When the two teams are sitting there at 14-2 and 13-2, it's certainly going to be a match that the committee has tight eyes on.
I'll remind you of one of our interviews with the Georgia Tech players. And the one thing they said is, don't forget about Notre Dame. They hit the ball hard.
Yeah, they do. I don't have them in our ACC standings here just because in my mind, they're completely out of the NCAA tournament hunt. But Florida State needs to make sure that they take care of business this weekend. They've got a huge one at home against Miami. Their football team had a miraculous come from behind win late against the Hurricanes last week. Now their volleyball team led by our girl Chacon is going to host Miami Friday at 6:30. Miami, the team that nobody's talking about, is going to make noise in the tournament. I'm going to guarantee that because I've watched them here and there, up and down, and they're an impressive squad. We may be talking more Miami next week. We're in talks with getting a couple setters on our show for next Saturday and next Sunday for recording. So that'll be fun. Let's briefly talk about the Big 12. I mean, there's not much to talk about. It's a 2-team bid kind of conference, and with the loss to Texas Tech early in the year, I can't see a situation unless Texas stumbles that it's not going to be the Longhorns taking it home again for another conference championship.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. There's 2 teams in that conference right now. And even though Iowa State has got an 8-6 record, they're not close to challenging and earning a spot, I don't think. I could be proven wrong with the RPI, the way they do it. But right now, the 2 teams to watch are Texas and Baylor.
And you know what? There was one thing I wanted to talk about, and this was brought to my attention from our good friend of the show, Cheese Trader, over on Twitter. And it's that Louisville, if they reach the regionals, Mick, and they're probably going to host a regional, they're going to be the number 1 seed unless they stumble. They can't play in their home arena because of conflicts. They're going to have to play in a convention center for the regionals, the KICC. And best as we can kind of look into it, it's not really an arena. It's an area with a couple seats. You know, they apparently they don't practice there. They've never played a test event there, none of that. So there's going to be a couple, quandaries coming on if Louisville moves on and plays, because I think don't hold me on. I think it might be basketball or a concert. I don't remember exactly, but there's something going on regional weekend. Can you believe that?
No, I can't believe that.
Undefeated season of Danny Busbroom Kelly, and it might be thwarted because they have to play in a freaking convention center.
And guess who the regional finals might be against? If you look at the brackets,
it could be Kentucky,
there,
right?
It very most likely is going to be Kentucky. Yeah. They would get Creighton.
Right. If everything lines up right, one would play. Yeah.
And Kentucky would get Minnesota, and you think Kentucky's going to play for that chance to play in their home state, and Louisville's going to get the chance to play in unfamiliar confines at home.
That would be, I would be beside myself if that was the situation. But let's move on and talk Pac-12. And here's another stat that blew me away, Mick. I don't know if you knew this. I don't know how many fans out there knew this, but UCLA, right? Volleyball powerhouse over the years. They haven't won a conference championship, a regular season. There's no conference tournament, regular season conference title since 1999. Before it was the Pac-12, right? You love the Pac-10. It's been that long. And with the loss to Oregon, they're back tied with Washington at 1-2 in what should be a phenomenal frenzy down the line in the Pac-12. Who are some of your favorites here on this list to really make some buzz coming up in December?
Well, if you're talking about the Pac-12, I think you're going to see a lot of organizational change. We have 3 teams tied for third at 11-5. They're 2 games out, but they're going to play each other, and they're going to play UCLA and Washington. So the way this Pac-12 has been, nobody's been counted on to win at any time, and Washington decides they're going to play 5 about every time they play. So you can expect everybody to hold their breath there, but Oregon, Utah, and Washington State are really in the hunt still, and you have to watch that. They're all tied for third.
Yeah, let me make a correction there. Utah is 11-5, a little bit of a typo on my graphic. So Utah, Oregon, and Washington State all 11-5. Oregon gets to go to Seattle and play Washington, while UCLA has the 2 Arizonas who have been very hard to beat this season.
You sound like that's a treat for Oregon to go to Washington and play.
It's a treat for the fans because it's 2 versus 3. I mean, I'd much rather that than see Washington play against Oregon State, which they will. It's going to be an Oregon State, Oregon weekend, but I'm saying I'm happy that we're at least going to see that.
Yeah, well, that's the game to watch out there. And then the team that keeps sneaking in under the radar is Washington State. Every time you think they're going to make a move, they lose to somebody. But they have the ability to sneak in there and really come together. So just keep your eye on the Cougars.
I'm going to keep an eye on the Cougars. We're going to keep an eye and now kind of, wrap up this episode by really focusing on what should be a phenomenal Big Ten hunt. Take a look at these Big Ten standings. If you guys haven't seen how tight it truly is, 1 game separating 1st and 5th, Wisconsin and Nebraska tied in that 1-2 spot. Wisconsin took care of Nebraska, remember, in Lincoln a few midweek days ago, or weeks ago, whatever, midweek game. Then Purdue, who's beaten Wisconsin twice, beaten Minnesota, beaten Penn State, tied with Penn State and Minnesota. And what a weekend we've got in front of us here this weekend, right, Mick? I mean, Purdue has Michigan and Northwestern, so that could be a tough test early on, but the marquee matches lie on Sunday. Wisconsin in Minneapolis for a 5:00 match on BTN, and Penn State, Ohio State should be a phenomenal duel as well.
Well, Penn State's got Nebraska also. So Penn State,
you're right, on Friday.
They come up on Friday and they take care of business because they're playing really at a high level. Let's say Penn State wins 2, they go
14-4.
Yeah, 14-4, and they're going to beat Nebraska and they're going to beat Minnesota. That puts Minnesota at 12-5, Nebraska at 13-4, and all at once we got people
mayhem
jumping around. Yeah.
And then should Nebraska lose, it's Wisconsin's road to journey. And then you look at Friday, November 26th, the last weekend of the season, and guess who comes to the UW Fieldhouse for a 5:30 start? Nebraska. So it's really a perfect situation in terms of scheduling among the conference. You've got Wisconsin against Minnesota. You've got Nebraska against Penn State. You've got Ohio State against Penn State all this weekend. The next weekend, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Penn State. And then on the last match, the final moment of the season, Saturday, November 27th, Mick, when all is said and done, there is still 1 match to be played in Holloway. Do you know what it is?
I don't.
It's Nebraska at Purdue.
See, I think
it's amazing. We couldn't have written this stuff.
Yeah, I think this is great because Nebraska all during the first half of the season had a perfect schedule. They never really had to go back to back against top 2 or 3 teams. They finished the season going back to back against people that they either can replace or whatever. Yeah. And that will tell me what Nebraska is going to do and maybe where they should be seated. If they come out of there with 2 wins, wow, I'd move them up and I'd get them in the tournament because they'll carry that right into the tournament.
Oh, I'm so excited. I mean, listen, I'm sure you can feel it coming from the 2 of us, but I hope you guys are excited as well. Even if you are not necessarily a Big Ten fan, it's just going to be their version of a conference tournament, which is what we've been asking for all these years. You've got the top 4 or 5 teams. They're basically playing a round robin. I think Ohio State's the only one that has 1 match against those other top 5, but they're on the outside looking in 2 games back between Wisconsin, Nebraska, Purdue, Penn State, Minnesota. They're pretty much all playing each other over the next 4 matches. It's going to be great. The Pac-12 doesn't quite have as pretty of a lineup. The final weekend, the first day, none of the top teams play against each other that Thursday or Friday, but that final Saturday, I'm looking at it right now and it's Washington plays Washington State. That'll be a good rivalry, and Stanford is going to play against Cal and USC that weekend, and UCLA will play USC, but none of the top dogs are going to compete against each other like we'll have with Louisville and Pittsburgh on the final game of their season. I think that's like Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving. So there are a lot of enticing, salivating matchups for us volleyball fans to get hyped for next weekend. Hold on, Mick. Next weekend, all of you mid-major and low-major fans can tune in. You can get your bucket of popcorn. We're going to break down these conference tournaments this upcoming weekend and where everything stands for the final week of the season.
So there's a big push to have Ohio State in the Final Four. And we look at them right now and it looks like they're out of it. But look at this. If they go out winning, they don't have another loss in the conference. They could be up there at 15-5, something like that. And Wisconsin, Nebraska, Purdue, Penn State, and Minnesota beat up on each other. Ohio State could be right in the hunt. Their schedule was they had to play all these people early. They played them in September and early October, so there's not a way for them to crescendo. But they're playing well now. They're starting to score. Londot is starting to score a lot better now. That's what they need to get their point ratio up per set. There's
a world where the Big Ten has a tie amongst more than 3 or 4 teams. And I've asked around. I'm not sure there is a situation in hand. Mick thinks it might go to points to find out the auto bid, but I think they may just split it like we did with Wisconsin, 2 years ago, where they were the co-champs.
You don't want to have a playoff?
Give me a playoff. Let's get the playoff. It's really not necessary because the auto in a conference like that doesn't quite matter, but that's something to keep an eye on for those of you that like to root for chaos. Now, one last thing, and before we recorded, the AVCA had a joint statement with the NCAA on a couple new announcements for this NCAA tournament. And between you and I, Mick, one of them makes me very happy. Okay, the first announcement is something that we knew months ago, weeks ago, and that's the official announcement. There will be a day off between the Sweet 16 and the round of 8 matches on December 9th and 10th. So the 10th will have the day off. The 11th will be the regional finals. The other announcement is that a new TerraFlex floor will be used for the men's and women's Final Four. The surface, I'm sure you're familiar with TerraFlex, but for those of you that aren't, it's used for the elite international competitions. And this season, it'll be instituted for those that might have complained about the flooring in Omaha, maybe. But here's the big one, and this is how we're going to wrap our show today. I'm very happy. Usually, Mick, and you know this, and all the student athletes know it, but maybe not all fans do. When the NCAA tournament starts, every team is forced to pick 15 players, and anyone not in that 15 is not allowed to practice during the tournament, is not allowed to stand on the bench with their teammates, and it's not always injured players or redshirted. Sometimes a team will employ 18 players during a season, and one of those players is heartbroken. Well, this year, not just the top 15 players, everyone listed on the roster is allowed to practice and stand on the sideline with the team. And it might feel minuscule, but it's something, because like I have been there and seen that 16th player get the news from the coach, and it breaks their heart and it breaks my heart. So it makes me very happy that they've made this minor change because it's good for the players. And how often do we see the NCAA making changes that are good for the players?
Well, that's certainly right. And as a coach, that's the last thing you want to do, getting everybody positive going in the tournament. And then you take Sally at the end of the bench here and say, yeah, but you can't suit up. Now, I remember Penn State, they had about 21 players a number of years ago in Omaha, and they put different shirts on those players and they made them shaggers, and they did all kinds of things to get them to have the experience. But a lot of other schools were upset because they wanted to bring extra players, but the NC2A wouldn't pay for it. Right. And that's the rub. Penn State paid for their players, even though they weren't going to be in uniform, to get down there on the floor and be part of the event. So that's really good news, Daniel. And yeah, good for the coaches and good for the players, and it's good for volleyball.
It's great news. I'm excited to see what this tournament is going to have in store, but there's still so much volleyball to play before we find things out. We are going to do a bit of a bracket prediction coming up in the next few weeks too. We'll throw out what we think are going to be our top 16 seeds. We're going to know all the automatic qualifiers in just a few weeks. Stay tuned for next week's episode. We'll have a couple sprinkles of some player interviews as well next Tuesday. So we're going to wrap this one up. He's Mick. I'm Daniel. Thanks so much for watching Six Rotations.